The train pulled into Copperhead flat 2 hours behind its posted time, which meant the light had already gone flat and western by the time she stepped down onto the platform. Not dark yet. Not usable either. The depot was a single room with a cast iron stove and a schedule board that hadn't been updated since April. She could tell by the date chalked in the upper right corner, and by the fact that the April 14th train was not the one she had been on. She set her traveling bag on the bench and stood in the doorway and looked at the town. Copperhead Flat sat in a basin between two low ridges, the kind of place that had sprung up because of the freight road rather than despite the terrain. Main Street ran east to west along the road itself. A dry goods store, a livery, a boarding house with a hand-lettered sign, a schoolhouse set back at the north end, a church with a steeple that leaned slightly south, the kind of lean that had been there long enough that no one noticed it anymore. And at the south end, where the freight road widened into a yard, the warehouse. She saw it the way she always saw structures first, before she saw anything else. It was a large building, larger than the town seemed to require, which told her the town had once expected more of itself. The main roof was intact but bowed at the center ridge. The east wall showed a lean that wasn't structural failure yet, but would be if the winter was heavy. Someone had braced it with a timber shore that was itself beginning to check along the grain. The shore had been there long enough that it had weathered to match the original siding. She was still reading the wall when she became aware that the town was reading her. Not all at once. In the way of small places, the woman sweeping the dry goods step had stopped sweeping. A man at the livery gate had gone still with his hands in his coat pockets. Two children on the schoolhouse road had slowed to a walk and were watching over their shoulders. She did not acknowledge any of them. She was counting the bays of the warehouse, estimating the span. The man came from the freight yard. He was perhaps 40, with a week's growth of beard and a right hand wrapped in cloth from the palm to just below the elbow. He walked without hurrying, which she noted because hurrying with a damaged hand was how you damaged it a second time. He stopped a few feet from her and looked at the bag at her feet, then at her. She looked back at him. He said he had a warehouse. She said she could see that. He didn't dress it up. The main load-bearing beam had cracked in August when a freight shipment shifted during unloading. He had tried to sister a new timber to it himself before the hand. The hand had happened at the same time. Bad angle on a sledgehammer, a slip, two small bones in the palm he couldn't afford to have set properly, so he'd had them set improperly, and the result was that he could carry and lift but couldn't grip a tool. Not with force. Not with the precision that work required. She was watching the warehouse while he talked. From where she stood, she could see the bow in the ridge more clearly now. It was not catastrophic. It was patient. Patient damage was the worst kind because it taught you to live with it until you couldn't. Room and board, he said. The office loft above the warehouse. No wages to speak of, not until the Reno contracts renewed after inspection. She said yes. He picked up her bag before she could reach for it. She did not argue. He was not being courteous, particularly. He was doing what his good hand could still do. She understood the difference. The loft above the warehouse office was small and had a single north-facing window. A cot, a washstand, a lantern on an iron hook. Through the window she could see the eastern ridge, and the ridge already had snow on it, which was early for October. She set her notebook on the sill. She did not unpack anything else. Below her, through the plank ceiling, she heard the sounds of supper, the scrape of a chair, his voice, low, and then another voice, higher, not a question exactly, more the shape of a complaint, the tone of someone who had rehearsed a position and was now delivering it, a boy's voice. 10 or 11, she thought, old enough to have opinions, young enough that the opinions still showed on his face. His voice again sharper. The man's answer brief, then quiet, then the sounds of a meal finding its way to an end. She sat on the edge of the cot and listened to the two of them below her. She had listened to silences long enough to know what they held. This one held its own kind of arrangement. A man and a boy navigating something they had both decided, separately, to stop naming. She turned down the lantern. Outside, the snow on the ridge had gone from white to blue. She was in the warehouse before the sky had finished graying. The main beam was a 12-inch Douglas fir, 26 feet from post to post, and it had cracked in the lower third of its span. Not a clean fracture, which would have been simpler, but a compression crack running diagonal across the grain. The wrong load applied the wrong way. She could see where the freight had hit. She could see where the man had tried to sister a new timber. The new wood was there, cut to length and propped in place, but not yet bolted, and the angle was slightly off. It would have transferred the load wrong and built a new problem while addressing the old one. A crack you don't set right is a conversation you'll have in 5 years about why you need a new building instead of just a better first repair. Her father had said that once and never repeated it because he considered it obvious. She stood beneath the beam with her hands in her coat pockets and looked at it for a long time. Behind her, she heard the warehouse door. The boy stood in the frame. He was not dressed for the cold. He watched her with the particular flatness children use when they have decided not to be impressed by something. She did not greet him. She looked back at the beam. After a moment, he said, "What's wrong with it?" She pointed to the crack. The load came from the side instead of straight down. Wood doesn't handle that well. He came a few steps closer, not because he was interested, she thought, but because he didn't want to shout across a cold warehouse. He looked up at the crack. "Can you fix it?" "That's what I'm here for." My father tried. He got the new timber right. The angle wants adjusting. The boy looked at the prop timber, then back at her. He didn't say anything else. He turned and went back out the door, and she heard his boots on the frozen ground heading toward the house. She turned back to the beam and began the measurements she would need. By the 8th day, she had established her sequence. She worked from the crack outward, addressing the sister beam first, resetting its angle. With a come-along she'd borrowed from the livery without asking, which she'd calculated was simpler than explaining what she needed it for. The beam took the correction without protest. Good wood remembered the shape it was supposed to hold. She bolted it in 3 places, countersinking each bolt so the bearing surface was flush. Then the crack itself. She cut a scarf into the original timber on either side of the fracture, fitted ice splice of the same species and grain direction, drawbored the joint so it would pull tight as the wood settled, and pinned it with square-cut nails rather than rounds. Square-cut nails held an old-growth fir the way rounds did not. She had learned this from her father. He had said it once. She drove the last nail on the 8th morning. She set the mallet down and looked at the joint. Tight, it would not be the thing that failed. That afternoon, she noticed he had stopped coming to the warehouse door. She had catalogued it without deciding to. For the first days, he had appeared once or twice on some errand, a ledger from the office shelf, a tool from the rack, and there had been a quality to how he moved past the beam that told her he was assessing. Not her work exactly, the sound of it. Whether the sounds she was making were the sounds of someone who knew what she was doing. She had heard it in the particular timing of his pauses near the door. A half-second of stillness, a held assessment, then movement again. On the 8th afternoon, he came for a ledger and walked past the beam without pausing at all. She noted it. She drove the next nail and moved on. There was a water pipe at the back of the freight yard, a 2-inch iron line running from the town's cistern to the yard trough. She had seen it on her 3rd day, walking the building perimeter the way she walked every new structure. The joint where the pipe met the cistern housing had begun to weep, a slow seep, not a failure, the kind of seep that became a failure when the ground froze hard and the ice expanded what the rust had started. She said nothing about it. She finished what she was doing and went back to the beam. But she measured the pipe in her memory the way her father had measured things he intended to return to. He had believed that noting a problem was a commitment, even if the commitment was only to yourself. On a Sunday morning before the town was moving, she went to the pipe with oakum packing, a caulking iron she'd made from a bent chisel, and a tin of lead wool compound from the ironmonger. The repair took 40 minutes. When she was finished, the joint was dry and the compound had set flush. She cleaned her tools on a rag and walked back to the warehouse. The next morning, the freight yard man, a lean, weathered man named Booth, who had lost 2 fingers to a belt drive years ago and seemed to hold this against no one, stopped her on her way past. He said the trough had been filling right for the first time in weeks. She said she'd noticed the joint. He looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded once and went back to his work. She went to hers. The dry goods woman was named Loretta. She had run the store alone since her husband's death, and she had the manner of someone who had learned to take the full measure of a thing before committing to an opinion of it. On a Thursday afternoon, she came to the warehouse, stood in the doorway without announcing herself, and watched the woman work. When the woman came down from the scaffolding, Loretta set a cloth-wrapped bundle on the nearest crate. Cornbread, 2 slices of salt pork, a boiled egg. She said her name and nothing else, and went back across the street. The woman ate standing up, looking at the east wall. She had reset the girt there the week before. The lean was gone. From where she stood, she could not see any evidence it had ever been there. She folded the cloth for returning. On the 15th day, rain came. The flat, decided kind that meant all day. She came down from the loft with her notebook and cleared a space at the end of the workbench. Not the beam, the steeple. She had seen it on her 4th day in town, from the street, from the angle that revealed the most. The base timbers where the steeple frame met the roof were showing rot at the south face, the face that caught both rain and sun in alternation, which was the worst combination for any joint. The steeple was not in danger, but the joint was losing its resistance to movement, and a steeple that moved in wind put stress on the bell mount, and a bell mount that worked loose eventually cracked its frame. She had paced the dimensions on 3 separate mornings, without stopping, without appearing to do anything other than walk. She had not been asked to look at it. She drew anyway. She was refining the replacement timber dimensions when she heard him come in from the rain. He crossed to the far shelving, running his good hand along the ledger spines. She did not look up. She heard him stop. The stop was different from the stops before. Those had been evaluating. This one was something else. She could not have said what exactly. She kept her pencil moving through a dimension mark on the timber face, the line clean, and felt the quality of the pause the way you feel a pressure change before weather decides to arrive. He came to stand beside the bench, not behind her, beside where he could see the open pages. She did not close the notebook. He looked at the drawings for a long moment. Then he reached past her, not reaching over but beside, arm extended without touching, and moved the oil lamp from the shelf hook to the bench, closer to where she was working. The light spread wide across the open pages. He went back to the shelves. He found what he'd come for. He went back out into the rain. She turned to the next page and kept drawing. The lamp burned steady. Outside, the rain came down without any indication it intended to stop. On the 22nd day, the boy came to find her. She was on the scaffolding inside the warehouse, fitting a new ledger board along the east wall when she heard boots on the floor below. She did not look down. She set the board and drove 2 nails to hold it, then looked. He was standing with a tin pail in both hands, and the expression of someone who had been sent to do a thing and was now reconciling that fact with the fact of not wanting to be there. She climbed down. Said his father had made soup. He said it the way children report facts that originated in someone else's decision. She took the pail. He didn't leave. He looked up at the new ledger board. What's that for? Wall girt. It carries the load from the siding into the post. He looked at the post, then at the board, following the logic. It wasn't there before? It was. It had failed. He looked at it a moment longer. Then he said, "How do you know when something fails?" She looked at him. It was a better question than he knew it was. "You look for where the wood has changed color," she said. "Where it's gone soft or shifted out of its original line. Wood tells you. You have to know what you're reading." He studied the post, then her, "Can I learn that?" She said, "Most things can be learned." He went back to the house. She set the pail on a crate and ate the soup standing, looking at the wall she'd straightened. Warm enough to work another 2 hours without thinking about her hands. She did not know which of them had decided to send it. The last interior board went down on the 33rd day. She drove the final nail, set the mallet across her knee, and looked at the nail head, even with the surface. Not proud, not countersunk, even. She had set nails for 33 days, and this one looked the same as the first one she'd set, which was exactly how it was supposed to be. She climbed to the roof to check the ridgeline one last time. Below her, Copperhead Flat was going about the middle of its day. Loretta was turning her sign in the store window. Booth was moving a freight wagon in the yard, his ruined hand in its usual rag. Two women she didn't know by name were crossing the north end of the street, talking, not looking up. Smoke from the schoolhouse chimney. The first time this season, which meant the teacher had decided to stop pretending the cold wasn't coming. She could see the steeple from here. The new base timber she had fitted on a Monday before the town was up. Pale against the old weathered frame, not yet gray. By spring, it would begin to match. In 2 years, no one walking past would know the repair was there. That was exactly right. 2 days later, a man came from Reno. He represented the freight company that contracted the warehouse, and he had come to inspect the repair before the winter terms were signed. He was perhaps 50, with the look of a man who had seen a great many structures and had decided opinions about all of them. He walked the warehouse floor. He put his hand on the main beam and pressed, testing the sister joint. He crouched and looked at the splice from below. He ran his palm down the east wall girt. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Who did this work?" The owner indicated her. The man from Reno looked at her. She was standing near the door with her arms at her sides, not performing anything. He looked back at the beam. He pressed the sister joint a second time. He said he had 2 other warehouses, one in Elko, one in Battle Mountain. He said it the way people make statements that are also invitations. She said she was familiar with the freight road. He placed a card on the nearest crate. He said the contracts would be in writing and that the Elko building was in worse condition than this one had been when she'd arrived. He said it as if he expected that to create urgency. She picked up the card and read the address. She set it back down. She said she would think about it. He left. The owner stood for a moment looking at the card on the crate. He looked at it without touching it, then went back to the office. She picked up her mallet and went back to work. She stayed on the roof longer than she needed to. The ridgeline was straight. She had already confirmed that, but she stayed, with both hands flat on the sheathing and the afternoon light coming down off the western ridge, and she looked at what she had built. Not just the beam and the wall and the girt and the steeple timber fitted in the dark before anyone was awake, but all of it together, the shape of 33 days laid out in wood and nail, and the kind of attention that does not ask to be acknowledged. Her trunk was in the loft. She had not packed it. She had thought about it in the mornings, standing in front of it with her hands at her sides, running the numbers the way she ran all numbers, methodically, without sentiment. Elko by Christmas. From Elko, several directions. The pass road stayed open most winters. She had not packed the trunk. The card on the crate. The pipe joint she'd repaired on a Sunday because she'd noted it, and noting it was a commitment. The steeple timber, because a problem you could see and walk past was a problem you'd chosen. The shimmed ladder rung on the loft staircase. She had fixed it on the 14th day because a loose rung was a conversation she didn't want to have with anyone. None of it asked for, all of it done in the same direction. She understood, sitting there, that she had been deciding something for 33 days without using that word for it. Below her, she heard the warehouse door. His boots on the steps, not hurried, the same unhurried weight she had learned to recognize, the sound of a man who did not move faster than the situation required. She did not turn. She heard him on the ladder, heard the loose rung she'd fixed hold solid under his boot, heard him come up over the eave and cross the roof to where she was sitting. He had 2 cups. The same tin cups from the office shelf. The 2 the boy had apparently stopped asking about because he already knew where they lived. The man lowered himself beside her without saying anything about the view or the work or the 33 days. He set 1 cup on the sheathing between them. She picked it up with both hands. The coffee was still hot. She could feel it through the tin. Below, from somewhere in the freight yard, she heard the boy's voice, brief, unconcerned, asking something of no one in particular, then quiet. He drank from his own cup. She held hers and thought about the card on the crate. She thought about Elko, which she had passed through once on a different kind of errand in worse weather. She thought about how a warehouse in Elko would look when she first walked into it. How she would stand in the center of the floor and turn once and read what was in front of her. How the work would be the same work, in a different building, in a different basin, watched by different people who did not yet know what she was reading. The first star appeared above the eastern ridge. She had not looked for it. It was simply there when she looked up. Her father had said once, in the language she had put down at the border when she crossed into this country, the language she no longer thought in except when she thought in it without meaning to, that the best joint was the one where the seam could not be found, where two pieces had become one thing, and the joint existed only in the knowing of it. She had not packed the trunk. Card on the crate. She had not moved it. She had not thrown it away. She had left it where the Reno man had set it, which was a decision, same as any other. She understood that now. She had been understanding it in pieces for some time. More stars. The sky came in the way Montana sky came in, the way all big sky came in at the end of a clear day, all at once, vast and cold and without a bottom to it. She breathed out slowly, both hands still around the cup, the warmth of it against her palms. Below, Copperhead Flat was lighting its lamps, one at a time, in the order that small towns have always lit them, beginning with whoever had a reason to stay up, ending with whoever did not. She had watched this same basin for 33 evenings, and she knew the order by now. The dry goods store first, then the boarding house, then the thin yellow squares of the houses along the North Street, one after another. He was still beside her. His shoulder was a few inches from hers. Neither of them had moved, and the finished roof held them both without any give at all. Cedar and cut nail and 33 days of work, solid as anything she had built, which was solid as anything she knew. The winter came in over the eastern ridge that night, as it came in every year before and would come in every year after, and when it did, the warehouse stood without moving. The steeple was still. The pipe joint held dry against the freeze. The ladder rung held. She did not pick up the card. The stars came.